Hello and welcome to this, the fifth and final conversation in the series being hosted by me, Niall Maxwell, on behalf of Architecture at the Edge, the Architecture Festival of Galway. This year, the festival was held in October, but since then we've been talking about Galway 2021. These conversations are aimed at understanding how to implement the ambitions of the festival to host a summer school, to be running Galway next year. With funding now in place, this conversation is the conclusion to a journey around Europe, taking in the views of some inspiring architects and creative practitioners working in the field of participatory design. In week one, we focused on interconnected disciplines, Tom Keeley, Fee MacDonald, and Owen Griffiths, providing different perspectives on engagement and participation. On week two, we looked at the participatory techniques with Daisy Frood, Dr. Mari McVicker, and Sebastio Loboton from Collectivo Warehouse in Lisbon. In week three, we entertained Alex Roma from Construct Lab over whiskey from Berlin. He was joined by the writer and curator Jess Fernie and Lee Ivett from Baxendale Studio, looking at the long term. And last week, we met Alex's friend Nicholas Fenelsa, Xenia from Italy, and Andrew Clancy in Dublin, discussing 3 models of summer school from across Europe, offering advice and counsel for what to plan for next year and how to lay the foundation for a long-term strategy. So to close out proceedings, we finish our conversations tonight by returning to Ireland to complete this odyssey, focusing on context and hearing from those working in the country to provide pointers for how next year will need to be planned. So of course, this final conversation is called Summer School. Joining me this week are Laurence Lord, an architect and a lecturer at Queen's University Belfast, along with Geoffrey Bolhuis. He co-founded AP+E in 2013, a design and research studio based in the Netherlands and Ireland, and with an agenda to strengthen the relevance of architecture as a social enterprise and to create spaces that stimulate new forms of community and interaction. He's best known, of course, for Free Market, Ireland's last contribution to the Venice Biennale. Jordan Ralph studied at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin and the Aarhus School of Architecture in Denmark, before spending time living and working in Copenhagen with some of the key practices in the city. He's exhibited as part of the Global Irish Design Challenge and was named as one of the 50 people to watch in 2017 by the Irish Times. His work spans from concept stores to exhibitions, residential to commercial, micro-architectural to restaurant interiors. And finally, Conor Clarke, co-founder and director of Design Factory and founder and program leader for Design West International Summer School, developed in collaboration with GMIT Letterfranc. His work has been exhibited in Dublin, London, Milan, New York, and Tokyo, and he is a well-known and respected contributor to the promotion of design in Ireland through his activities with the Institute of Creative Advertising and Design and the Institute of Designers in Ireland. He was the recipient of the Catherine Donnelly Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to design at the 2019 ICAD Awards. Gosh, you all sound terribly important. Welcome and thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Niall.
It's good to see you all. Good to see you all. And Conor, where do I find you?
I'm speaking to you tonight from the exotic bedroom of my son in my house in Killiney. He's probably dying to get back in here later on, but you know, it's the warmest room in the house and it's got good Wi-Fi, so yeah, I'm happy to be here. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Jordan, whereabouts are you? You're not far away from me.
No, I'm in the sitting room of my house in Dublin 8.
Great. And you've got a studio in Dublin as well, have you?
Yeah, my studio is in my house, so I'm sitting in my studio / house.
Okay. And Laurence, you're slightly further north, aren't you?
I am indeed, yeah. I'm calling from Kings Court this evening, Kings Court, County Cavan.
Okay.
We're going to go into the weeds. I'm in the dining room of our house, and all the loud people are at the far end of the house. So,
But are you? I mean, you're based there because obviously you've got one foot in each camp. You're teaching in Belfast, but obviously you're doing that probably via Teams or Zoom at the moment.
Well, yeah, this last semester it's all been online, but yeah, I'm a lecturer up in Queens as well, up in Belfast.
Okay, how many days a week are you doing that?
Contract says 2.5 now.
5 then. Yeah, the usual.
Yeah, exactly.
Dealing with emails at 11 o'clock at night in the normal.
Yes, there are restrictions on when these emails meant to go out, but they can be written any time of the day now.
Exactly. Good. Conor, could we get started with you maybe? If you could share your screen, because
Yes.
you're the kind of the most recent person with summer school experience, given what you've been doing with Design West and Galway. It'd be interesting to hear about
Cool,
what
yeah.
you've been up to.
So, can you see that?
You can, yeah. You can just put it on full screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Fire away.
Okay. So, as we've been chatting earlier on, I've been in and out of NCAD since I was a student, and from 2013 to 2016, I found myself as head of the department there of visual communication or graphic design in Old Money. And while I was there, I had an ongoing policy of inviting designers to come in and talk to the students. And I was privileged to actually ask the UK designer Hamish Muir, who came over to spend some time with me and the students, and he spoke to me very fondly of his summers in Porto. He was involved in the Porto Design Summer School. So I began to get intrigued about the whole notion of a summer school. And I guess that conversation and then this particular book were the two key sort of things that got me thinking about summer schools. This book, The Experimenters by Eva Diaz, is about Black Mountain College, and it was lent to me by my colleague at NCAD, Kate Brangan, and it was an intriguing story. I couldn't put it down. Black Mountain College was established in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina in 1933, and it was very much an experimental school. It wasn't strictly speaking an art school. It was a liberal arts college, but the founders felt that placing art and design at the center of education was fundamental. It just happened to coincide with the Nazis had closed down the Bauhaus, and the architect Philip Johnson had recommended that the people at Black Mountain College talk to Joseph Albers, who was out of work, funnily enough, after the Bauhaus closed down. So he himself, Joseph and Annie Albers, ended up going to North Carolina, and they were kind of fundamental sort of tutors there. What appealed to me about Black Mountain was it was kind of like a rogue college. I mean, we were talking about management and administration and all those issues that, you know, every institution has to have, of course, to work. But in 1933, they decided that they didn't want any of that. Like, there was no fees, there was no grades, there was no entry requirements. People could graduate whenever they wanted to. There was no exams. Tutors and staff all mixed together, and they ate together, and they lived together, and they worked together. So the idea of doing something like that in Ireland began to appeal to me. And what also appealed to me was the fact that Black Mountain College was in a very remote location. And I thought, well, how can we do that in Ireland? So I got together with the people at GMIT Letterfrack, and it took 2 years to get us to the opening of Design West, but we got there. And one of the big things that I kind of picked up from the experimenters, Black Mountain College, and that whole sort of movement, and also from reading The Rings of Saturn by Sebald, was this whole business of walking as research, which kind of intrigued me, and you know, progressive education based on making, with sort of learning by doing as being the central sort of tenet of the course. And you know, at Design West, we made a point that, okay, we had fantastic facilities at our disposal on the campus at GMIT, but we made sure that we got out every day. We were like, spent the mornings in the studios, but we were on excursions and field trips every afternoon. This is an image of our trip in that fantastic summer of 2018 to Inishbofin Island. You can see from the slides the kind of the range of nationalities we had there. I mean, it was quite exciting to be in Letterfrack village at the bus stop on the opening night and just sort of seeing who's going to get off the bus next. You know, people from Tokyo, people from Mexico, Uruguay, you can see the list there. And it was that sort of melting pot of nationalities and indeed different design and advertising disciplines coming together that made the whole experience really, really interesting, you know. But when we threw our participants into the environment at GMIT and working with the great technicians there, we got some extraordinary results. This is just one example, a student from Catarina Barbosa from Portugal, who had never worked in 3 dimensions before, graphic design student, and she ended up, first of all, taking the risk to go out to the edge of the west coast of Ireland and participate, and then to actually make almost architectural letter forms, which were sort of 2 meters high. And you can see how she made a modular system of letters that spelled out the full sort of word letterfrack there. It was a kind of an identity stroke typography project. But we got some extraordinary results like that from people sort of diving into or diving out of, should I say, their comfort zone and getting involved in areas that were completely new to them. And of course, we had great help from the technicians at GMIT. But you know, we gleaned some extraordinary results, and especially when you consider that the first week was all about excursions and field trips and, you know, discovery. A lot of this work was made in week 2, and we had an extraordinary kind of show at the end of the 2 weeks, which, in my view, would compete with any kind of graduate show at any design school on our islands as such. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. So just in summary then, I think it might be useful to know identifying a location, partnering with an institution, having fantastic facilities in a remote location. It was a kind of a dream come true scenario through a series of happy accidents, I guess. And then you know, kind of when everybody arrived, just kind of going for it really, and just to seeing what happened at the end. And it's just been a great experience for me, and I think for everybody involved, you know.
I think the interesting thing is, Conor, that you got all of these students coming from around the world, but what about the mix of tutors? How did you go about sort of providing them with a balance?
The kind of criteria I set was that I was to identify, you know, principally my world is graphic design, visual communications, but to identify graphic designers globally who were comfortable working in 3 dimensions. So in year 1, we identified Arthur Rebello from R2 Design in Porto, who do a lot of work with architects, do a lot of constructed typography in concrete, very comfortable in working in 3 dimensions. And then we had a Spanish illustrator, quite well known, Isidro Ferrer, who works in 3 dimensions all the time, and then he photographs his work. Isidro didn't have a word of English, so we had an interpreter, and you know, the fact that, you know, we had to listen to the interpreter made everybody hang on every word Isidro had, and it just made the experience even richer in the end. But
I'm curious to ask, the students that had traveled from really far away and potentially it was their first time in Ireland, was it a shock for them? Was the Ireland that they got the Ireland they were expecting, or was it quite different to what they were expecting?
I think they were blown out. But for starters, like taking the ferry, Jordan, out to Inishbofin during that summer, it was like going out to the Greek islands. The weather was so good. It was like
it's beautiful out there that time of year.
34 degrees or something. You know, it was extraordinary, really.
You certainly lucked out on the weather that year, didn't you?
Absolutely blessed, Neil. So it was amazing, you know.
It could also be a false dawn, though, I suppose, in the sense you get very complacent with your good fortune if you thought every year was going to be like that.
Well, the second year wasn't too bad, and then of course we couldn't do it last year because of COVID, and the weather wasn't great anyway. So you know, I think we've been lucky weather-wise, really.
Yeah.
But I had my first planning meeting this morning with the crew at GMIT Letterfrack. So we're planning to be back June 2021. So that's exciting.
And do you theme each year? Is there a particular kind of agenda that you're trying to sort of address? And is that reflective in the tutors that you may choose?
It's all integrated, yes. What we do is we would write 6 briefs, and all the briefs would tie into the landscape in some way. It might be to do with local food producers. It might be to do with local place names and the Irish language, and how the Irish language is translated into the English language, and what's been gained and what's been lost. And we share those briefs before the students arrive in Letterfrack with a series of webinars in the weeks leading up to the opening of the summer school. So they arrive in Letterfrack having chosen a brief or 2 briefs, and they hit the ground running in a sense. You know, they have their notebooks. They know sort of generally what they're going to do.
It sounds like they're arriving super engaged and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. But what's brilliant though is that as soon as they arrive and they feel super engaged, the first thing we say to them is that you're fully entitled to change your mind. You know what I mean? So that kind of does the head in a bit. And some of them will stick with the brief that they've chosen. Others will completely surprise themselves and surprise us by the end of week 2. So yeah, no, a bit like Black Mountain, we try and not to have too many rules. We try and keep it loose and open, you know.
And I think that's what's come out of a lot of the conversations that we've had over the last few weeks, is that you can start with a plan, but sometimes actually it can be the kind of the Achilles heel of the whole school if you're trying to stick to the plan. There has to be a level of freedom. Do you feel that creativity, or so that looseness, is also reflective in the creativity? Because you seem to be very pleased with the output from this 2-week period.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I remember comments from some of the students at the end of last year, students who kind of specialized like in, say, illustration, for example, and ended up, because of the atmosphere and because of the encouragement of the tutors and the technicians, ended up designing a typeface for the first time, for example, you know. And of course, the melting pot was hugely influential. You had people who were working in data analysis from the world of advertising, mixing with people who had never done a primary degree, had worked in packaging companies and were looking for a kind of a break, through to people who had been working in industry for 10 years and just wanted a refresh. So there was a kind of a very interesting mix of people. And I guess the other great thing was that everybody was out on the edge together. So, you know, you're all together in this kind of adventure and you kind of have to get on in a way.
Yeah.
And actually at the end of each summer school, it was kind of emotional, everybody saying goodbye. These people were kind of thrown together into a situation, and you know, I think they made great friends, you know.
It reminds me a little bit of is it Building 20 at MIT, the way they describe that sort of that clash of different disciplines in the creativity.
Yes.
Whether it be scientific or in other sort of disciplines, and that sort of led to some incredible engagement between disciplines. And I think this is probably what's coming out again from a number of the conversations, that if we focused it just on architecture, it really starts to narrow it rather than expand it. But the minute you offer the opportunity for cross-disciplinary conversations, then the magic happens.
Exactly. And I'm excited at the prospect that architects might join us in 2021. That could be very interesting,
Yeah. Conor, thanks for now. If you could stop sharing that. That was a lovely sort of way into this, really, because obviously it's really only 2 years of running this, but 2 years of planning. That's a huge amount of time. Was that just logistically because you knew that it was going to take that long, or that it actually kept going and going before you eventually launched it?
We wanted to go after the first year, but certain things happened and we couldn't do it. And then we actually took a break for a while, because it's actually, it's quite energy sapping trying to build something like this. And then, having taken a break, then I reconnected with Dermot O'Donovan at GMIT, and I said, would you like to go at this again? And he was very enthusiastic, and we went for it again. And of course, the whole thing is about team building. It's about making friends and connections with the staff and technicians at GMIT, and then building my own team who need to deliver teaching across. We have letterpress printing, we had risograph printing, I had my friend Martin Wright, an artist who I had collaborated with on a project in Marfa in Texas, which again was another artistic community, remote, on the edge. And we had the great pleasure of Martin showing his work in Connemara National Park. So there's fine art going on, design, advertising, interesting melting pot, really.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. Jordan, can I ask you to share your screen? Because maybe we'll go to you.
Sure.
While you're doing that, Conor, it's interesting because I've got a print of Hamish Muir on the wall here.
Oh, fantastic.
He's quite a character, isn't he?
He's a great character, and I haven't spoken to him for a couple of years now, but I was a big fan of his work back in Factory Record, 8VO and Factory Record days, and
Yeah, but the great thing is he's still producing typeface and typography, and he's still innovating, which is lovely to see.
I mean, Muir McNeil. So I'm quite interested in maybe getting them to Letterfrack at some point. Yeah.
Sounds good. Jordan, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Niall. So I wanted to talk a bit about my process, and that will kind of segue into the current project I'm working on out in the west of Ireland. So I'd say I'm quite a process-driven designer. And to kind of give you an insight into how my head works, I wanted to share this project called The Space Between. The Space Between was completed last year, a couple of months before the lockdown kicked in. And it's a huge yoga studios and tea shop in Dublin city centre. And yeah, for me, it's a really, really special project. It's I actually forgot to show that there's 2 yoga studios. I was trying to squeeze so much into one page, but the building consists of 2 large yoga studios, one for heated yoga with infrared panels suspended from the roof, and a regular studio. It's got changing facilities, an atrium with a big wall garden, and a tea shop and reception in the front. And my process is really about kind of getting into the essence of whatever the design or the space or the building is for, and trying to manifest that into the design itself. So being a yoga practitioner myself, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I could kind of embody the feeling of yoga into a space. And I kind of settled for the concept of Shavasana, which is your final resting pose at the end of a yoga flow, where after doing a really intense kind of sequence of moves and being under a lot of kind of physical and mental strain, you lie down on the ground, and the floor just kind of holds you, and you fall into this semi-meditative state, and it's a really incredible feeling. It's kind of something between being asleep and floating off the ground. And I wanted to try and embody that feeling into the entire space and do it in a kind of completely non-religious, secular, no feeling of kind of the taboos about yoga spaces and any kind of overdone mindfulness or anything like that. So the whole space is gray and white to kind of create this cerebral space of matter. All the joinery is done in whitened Irish ash timber, and then we kind of have these pops of color and really interesting moments with lighting and material. So for example, the mirror behind the reception desk in the left image is a collaboration with a Dutch artist called Chimke de Bouwer, and it really kind of, it's the first thing you see as you walk into the space, and it kind of really physically manifests that feeling of the space between the conscious and the subconscious, or the physical and the metaphysical. So it's quite a mute space, but then there's these moments which really make you kind of think about what's going on. And yeah, I guess that being said, my process is very much about kind of getting really deep inside whatever a design is for, and then trying to manifest that in a really kind of true to the form manner. So that being said, I'll move on to my next slide, which is, so the project that I'm currently working on, which is relevant to what we're talking about today, is I'm designing an artist residency for Studio Drop on Inisheer. Inisheer is one of the Aran Islands off Galway. So you've got Inishman, Inisheer and Inishmore, and Inisheer is the smallest of the three, and it's a tiny but beautiful island, and Studio Drop is running an artist residency there, which I'm designing the structure for. It's going to be for an artist to go and spend a period of time in, anything between a couple of weeks to a couple of months, where they'll live in this kind of piece of microarchitecture, and every day they'll get up and walk around the island and create whatever art or body of work they're working on. And similar to the space between, I'm working through a process to kind of get to the most perfect, in my eyes, and holistic design for the site. So my very first kind of port of call was kind of finding reference points for the form, and it had to be something that was true to both the island and the Irish coast and the heritage, but also the future of where we're going with this. So 3 structures really kind of started to jump out when I was digging. On the left, we've got the beehive huts, which are famous. You'll see a lot of them out in West Cork in Ireland that monks used to live in. And they're made of layered up stone that's corbelled at the top, and they date back for hundreds of years, and they were also similar forms were used in ancient Ireland as sweat lodges as well. And they're absolutely stunning structures. And for me, when I see them, I immediately picture them being on an island or the coast, even if you don't see the surrounding kind of landscape. Then the second form that was sticking out to me was the Martello Towers, which cover the entire Irish coastline, and they were old warning towers when invaders were coming to Ireland, and people would light fires on top of them. So you have them, like I said, dotting the whole Irish coastline, and potentially the English coastline as well, Niall, I think. And yeah, I think they're really kind of strong coastal structures that look like they're built to tolerate the abuse of the weather. The third structure on the right is these beach shelters in Bray. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in Bray, and my granny lived there. And again, they're very coastal. They're kind of almost retro futuristic, made from poured concrete. And yeah, I think they're stunning forms. So the 3 of these forms were kind of the beginning of my process for designing this residency for the Aran Islands. Moving on from that, then the next port of call was trying to figure out what materials I wanted to use to build this structure. So again, I'm very process driven with materiality. So myself and Mary, who runs Studio Drop, flew out to Inisheer one day, and we walked around the islands, and I was looking at what materials and what things I could kind of almost sample and imbue into this structure to give it a lot of kind of like a local I guess it just needed to feel like it was cut from the same stone as the island itself. So even though we were going to take this foreign object and stick it there, it needed to feel like it belonged there. So there's a really famous shipwreck on Inisheer. I've forgotten the name of it, but it's completely rusted. So it's just this giant hull of what looks like Corten steel, and it's the material palette of that kind of rusted steel is synonymous with me for the island. And then the other kind of thing that was really important for me was to redefine the archetype of a piece of microarchitecture or a small hut that someone would go and live in. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm almost sick to death of seeing structures that are clad in charred black timber, and they're really beautiful, but it's just so overdone. And I was trying to think about how I could do something new with that was also way more relevant to the west coast of Ireland. And Galway and the Aran Islands has a really rich culture in harvesting seaweed, both for using as using on crops, and also for seaweed baths and for people's skin and for eating and all kinds of things. And when I was out west with Mary, we discovered just that the heritage of this seaweed farming has been going back a few hundred years, and it's huge, especially on the islands. So I started to think to myself, how could we use the seaweed to imbue this artist residency with something very important? And we came up with the concept of creating a timber stain out of the seaweed itself. So we're in the process of developing a timber stain that will stain the structure's cladding green out of the local seaweed. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, basically, about my process and how I would go somewhere like the west of Ireland or Galway and really dig deep in the local materials and heritage and try and take that and bring it into a project which is going to be very modern and very new, but still carry the culture of where it's about.
It was the Plassey, wasn't it? It was the shipwreck.
The Plassey, yeah.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking there's only about 250 people living on this island?
Exactly, yeah. It's got a very small population.
So your contribution is quite significant in the context of that.
Sure.
What is the makeup of the island in terms of work and land use?
So it's almost entirely rock, actually. It's a really barren landscape. There is there is some amount of kind of green fields with cows. I'm not entirely sure on the statistics on that, to be honest now, Niall.
It's all right. It was only because I was trying to sort of place this work, because it is very remote.
Sure. So when you come onto the island on the ferry, I'm trying to imagine explaining it when you haven't been there, but if you turn right when you come off the ferry, the whole kind of right face of the island that faces the mainland is stone, and it's huge big flat plateaus with jagged kind of gaps and rocks in between them. So that's the most barren and unused part of the island, and that's where we're actually placing the studio. So it's going to be kind of almost like an outpost on a foreign planet almost. And then the studio is going to look out to Inishmaan, which is also quite barren. You won't see any houses or any people from where we're placing this, so it's going to be an amazing spot for an artist to go and work.
And quite exposed as well, I suppose, if they're not used to such remoteness. It's not going to suit everyone, is it? Very
exposed, and that's one of the reasons why I'm referencing the Irish coastal forms, because they're obviously designed to take a battering from the wind and the rain.
Yeah, so it's going to have to be built to resist that as well. Is it temporary?
Exactly.
Do you need planning? How does it work in terms of the process?
So it's essentially temporary because it comes apart in pieces, and it's going to be built in with a skeleton and then 4 sections, and then lifted onto the island and installed like a giant Lego set, basically. And the plan, the tandem plan, is that it will also be developed as an emergency rescue kind of shelter as well that could be deployable.
Oh, interesting. So you're sort of suddenly finding an extra or additional use for it. But by the way, there are 103 MATERIALITYs in the UK.
Oh wow! Okay, so there's probably
plenty. Yeah, we're showing off. I think we've got more. We've even got a few down near us on the Welsh coast. That's really interesting, actually, as a whole kind of project. But you studied? Did you study industrial design first before you went into architecture?
Yeah, so I didn't get the points to get into architecture in college, and then I ended up studying astrophysics because I wanted to be an astronaut. And then I moved into industrial design or product design. And
the dream of the astronaut thing, did you realize that actually it was quite hard work to become an astronaut, or is it just that you didn't
just the reality of studying astrophysics in university was sitting in a lecture hall with 300 people with a tutor who just didn't care about life, reaming off notes, and it wasn't that inspiring.
So the reason I was kind of driving this question was actually to do with your making process and how you go about fabricating. Is this something that you're very hands-on, or are you surrounding yourself with, in the same way that Conor talks about all of this sort of expertise at Letterfrac? Do you have that similar kind of setup, or is it very much a solo effort?
It's a great question. Because of my background in product design, I'm an insane perfectionist. And if I do a one-off piece, I want it to look like it came off a factory line. So I kind of realized early on that although I enjoy making things, if I didn't want to be limited to just one or two materials, I was going to have to start collaborating with people who were experts in that material. So I work with all kinds of people, from builders to carbon fiber specialists, to specialist metal workers, to glass workers. Whoever I need to get the best of in that field, I'll try and find them. So I've actually managed to build up a pretty amazing network of makers in Ireland that specialize in different materials.
I think it's also the sign of a good designer, though, when you actually understand where you need to pull on the expertise of others, rather than thinking you can effectively be the jack of all trades, because we know where that leads. It sort of leads to kind of an unsatisfactory.
So much more exciting working with all these people as well, because they bring so much to the table themselves. For example, the person who's building this project with us for Studio Drop is a guy called Harrison Gardner, and he designed and built a library on the island a couple of years ago, which was a beautiful structure. And he's an amazing builder. He's traveled all over the world and built all kinds of amazing schools and structures, and he's feeding in so much to the design himself. So it's always fun to collaborate with people rather than just being a solo effort.
And he's also aware of the climate and the weather on the island.
Exactly. He lives locally, so he's aware of it.
Yeah, good. Thanks so much, Jordan. That's really fascinating. If you want to maybe stop sharing, that'd be great. Conor, is that the island that you took your students to as part of the summer school, or is that the adjacent island?
No, we went to Inishbofin, which is a bit closer. But we have toyed with the idea of going to the Aran Islands, and actually the prospect of maybe going out and just seeing the structure that Jordan's working on, that could be interesting, you know.
Be nice to join the dots, wouldn't it? All of these things come together.
Yeah.
Laurence, you've been very patient. It's 45 minutes since we started this, and you're still sitting there in your nice jumper. Do you want to maybe join the conversation by sharing your screen? We can sort of have a look at what you've been
absolutely
up to.
So, are we good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I'm going to talk about three projects quite quickly this evening, and then I'm going to try and thread a theme between the three of them. The three projects are different period and time frame, different projects in terms of scale, different user groups, different whether they're built or not. There's what the type of architecture is. There's a lot of differences, but there's one thing that's very similar amongst them all, and that's they're all models of engagement with non-architects, which that might sound absolutely ridiculous in terms of the conversation that we're having with an industrial designer and a graphic designer, but in the sort of in the silos of architecture, I think it's actually really important that the conversation moves past that. It moves past this notion of only architects are interested in architecture, or architecture is only for architects. Or so the first project that I'm going to speak about is this is a project that we did in a school. It's a number of years ago. This is built 5 years ago now. it's an outdoor classroom, effectively. It's an outdoor learning space. And there was a Present for Art competition in Carlow, Educate Together. We were successful in that, and we made this exterior pavilion that's got tiered seating. It's a framework that holds plants, holds planting. And we had a bag of seeds, and we had an ecologist look at our plan, and we passed it over to the students. And the idea would be that they would learn from appropriating the plants, taking ownership of it, watching them grow, and then ultimately harvesting them. And then over the years, I guess it's changed, which is kind of the point, right? When the architects leave, it becomes a much more interesting project, because it's now planted in, you know, whatever flowers they particularly like, or whatever cuttings they could bring from home, and it's very much their space. And then there was quite a nice moment then, aside obviously from the global pandemic, but there was a nice moment with this school kind of identified that they were kind of ahead of the curve in terms of having spaces that they could teach in outside. They had the facility to do outdoor learning kind of before the schools had, when the first during the early parts of COVID. So this is kind of interesting to us in terms of providing a framework. It's about the students, and then it facilitates sort of a long-term engagement with architecture that we have no direct involvement in. The second project I'm going to talk about, and as Niall highlighted, it's a project that has kind of gotten a lot of press in the last few years. This is Free Market. I'm one of 6 on this team. So there's Orla Murphy, Miriam Delaney, Joanne Butler, Tara Kenny, Jeffrey Bolhuis, and myself. We're the co-curators, co-commissioners of this project. This project was originally, it's the Irish National Pavilion for the Venice Biennale. It's looking at market towns all across Ireland, across the island of Ireland, the conditions that confront them now in terms of migration, vacancy, dilapidation, overrun of the key market spaces with cars, the hierarchy of pedestrians, how this is all impacted on the towns, how they're developing, and what their future might hold. We spent 6 months in the Venice Biennale, and then this image is of when we returned back to Ireland. So we actually brought the pavilion back, we dismantled it, reconstructed again in a number of different reconfigurations, and then brought it back to 4 towns across the country. In terms of the overall thematics of this, how it connects to the other projects, was that we came to see this project as almost like a platform for discussion. The architecture that's on show here, or in the image that Niall showed earlier of the actual pavilion, is actually very much secondary. This project became about affecting policy. It came about impacting on a political level. The latest Irish programme for government includes some of the things that we were chiming from in this project, talking about where the funding goes, how the funding is difficult to draw down, why Irish towns are suffering, where there are disconnects, and so it's just interesting in terms of how we opened up. There was a conversation that was happening there. We mined this previous information, and then the project has sort of had a long-term legacy. And then the direct legacy, which is kind of interesting at the minute, is that this shot is taken in Castleblaney, County Monaghan, not from where I'm calling you this evening. And now we're actually back there. So 5 of the team were back there. We're part of an engagement strategy. So if that image, maybe if you can see that there, that building there, that's the market house in Castleblaney. Its roof is still fallen in. Sorry, has now fallen in. It's derelict. It's vacant, and it's on the verge of dereliction. It's got a very prominent position in the middle of the town, where it effectively operates as an unnecessary roundabout. So we're now working with Monaghan County Council. We're involved in an engagement strategy where we're seeking the advice of locals. We're listening, we're gathering information, and we're collating with the idea of then putting together a program for what this building can be in the future. So it's at the sort of the next stage of how this building can be brought back to life. This fine, handsome building in the middle of this town. So it's again this platform for discussion and opening up this notion of engagement with non-architects, where we positioned ourselves in the town when this particular photograph was taken. We were there for 4 days. There's a strong festival culture in Castleblaney. Mucknomania is this festival that's occurring at this time, which is a family-friendly festival. So everyone that was going to that festival had to kind of come past our pavilion, and we had newspapers, we had a vox pop, we were seeking opinions, we were talking to as many people as possible, and it's sort of trying to break down the sort of the typical barriers that may exist to try and open up the conversations that, you know, the importance of the built environment, the importance of the built heritage, and what that could potentially mean for the people living in the town. And then finally, if you'll forgive this indulgence, Niall, I'm just going to talk very briefly about another project that we're working on. This is a competition that we won across the summer with DMAG, Daryl Mulvihill, and the VAC. This is in Harlem. The reason I included this was because there's a sort of, in terms of this sort of idea of engagement with non-architects, this was a project that was predominantly about housing. There was 256 post-war dwellings in this particular region in the Schalkwijk in Harlem that the developer wants to knock down, tabula rasa, start again, much more efficient housing. And our suggestion for the competition was maybe we don't need to knock all of those down. But through the engagement that we were doing across the process, meeting as many people as possible, meeting all these local initiatives that were occurring, the one thing that became very evident to us was that as designers, we couldn't necessarily solve these issues through design. We couldn't solve the systemic societal concerns that were on a day-to-day basis. There wasn't, you know, A, it wasn't really in our remit, and B, there wasn't some panacea that the architects could just land in and deliver. And so what emerged through that conversation was this idea of this Commons College. So this is sort of providing the framework again to have conversations, for these conversations to happen. So we termed it, like it's in Dutch, but the translations, we termed it to provide a space where all these initiatives could land. So that's what the Commons College is. So the Commons College is effectively, it's former housing, 4 stories apartments, 3 above garages that we're recladding, reskinning. And then the proposal is this is a public space, cafe spaces in there, and it's a space for sort of a shared type of education, a shared type of collaborative, a shared type of commoning of different principles that would impact on this neighborhood. It's proximity, it's directly opposite the local school, there's public realm around it, and then all the other housing that we talk about in the competition kind of bleeds from this. So I think I think that's kind of it. It's sort of that, trying to work a few projects, but think about the thematics of architects engaging with non-architects, which might be.
I think the link is convincing for me, and what I love about it is the 3 scales, and actually the way you're moving through from children to different groups of engagement. But this is a theme that's really come up in a number of the conversations about the role of the non-architect. It's a kind of horrible term, actually, isn't it? The negative that sits before it, but the idea that they're curious, that they can be a novice, and actually that's empowering by allowing them to engage and communicate and to effectively have a voice in the process, whether it be in planning or development or building. And I think it was Xenia actually talking about the Russian Art Park and the way in which the village now made the decisions on what got built and how the project ran, because the man who'd been running it for all of these years was getting to that age where he wasn't going to be around forever. So suddenly the power had been transferred, which is a lovely sort of way of looking at the architectural role. And I think I just want to pick up on the free market, because what's so interesting about that is that Venice as a whole is easy to criticize because of the lack of repatriation. I know this is a theme with the British Pavilion. I don't know how it works in Ireland, but this project that you're running really has that feel that you were giving it an additional form of agency by taking it home and then starting to use it as really a facilitator for conversations.
Yeah, 100%. There was this moment when we were pitching for this. So the bit of the background, you pitch for this like about 9 months before you need to deliver. Well, we did. I think they might have changed that slightly. And the overall curation that year was by Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara. So we were very eager to try and be the Irish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in that year. But there's a unique there's a unique scenario, and where there's a number of partners that come on board to be some of the principal funders for the National Pavilion. One of them is Culture Ireland. Culture Ireland's remit is to promote Irish culture abroad. And the other one's the Arts Council. And the Arts Council, while they have a wider remit, they're sort of promoting the arts and promoting architecture within Ireland. So you have two masters. So no matter what happens, you're going to be bringing it back to a number of venues in Ireland. And because we were looking at studying these towns, looking at studying the open spaces within these towns and how they operate, for us it was a no-brainer. That was kind of our key remit, that we weren't going to return back to where the National Pavilion normally returns, which is to Dublin, Cork, Galway, Belfast, Limerick, wherever. We were actually going to go to these towns. And then secondly, which is another point that I also wanted to mention this evening, was that we wanted it to be external. So what was really critical about us bringing the pavilions back and going to these towns and having these types of spaces, like, that's just crappy tarmac macadam where we're sitting our pavilions, was the idea that we're lowering the threshold of engagement. This meant that we could reach out as much as possible. There wasn't this idea of having to step into a room, a white gallery space, or go past a colophone before you could get a sense of things. But it was out there, it was out on the street, it was in the rain, it was in amongst all the other stuff. And every town that we went to, it was key to be mixed in with another event that was superseding it. So whether as I said, in Castlevania, there was the Mucknomania, there was also triathlon as well that went through Pavilion. But there was also, in Macroom, there was a market we were trying to key into. There was a festival, a knitting festival that was occurring in Mount Mellick that we were trying to key into. So it was always a case of us trying to maximize our reach and move it past the sort of the typical reach that an architect interested in the Venice Biennale might go. So it was a nice positioning for us that this thing had to work in Venice, but also then it had to work back in rural Irish towns.
Yeah, and also, as you say, in Venice, of course, you're in an exhibition format, in one of the large buildings, and then suddenly you're out on the street. But also the idea that you're partnering or finding adjacencies to complement the ability for this to exist, which is a clever turn. Can I just ask you about the 6 of you that are involved? Are you all architects?
We're architects and designers, so everyone has a degree in architecture. A number of us work in universities. A number of us work as full-time as designers, like as well. So Joanne Butler's Superfolk. So she's everything from painting to designing homeware to curating. And then we'd never worked together. We're not a practice, but there was crossovers between us all that we'd worked together in the past.
Okay, so did you have to delegate between the 6 people on what aspects of the project you were working on, or how did that work?
No, it's completely collaborative. There was no hierarchy. It was
okay. Wow.
6 co-curators, co-commissioners. We're all still talking. We're all in touch. pretty active WhatsApp. No, and that was really important. And the collaboration is I'm sure you realize. 2 of the projects I've talked about there, like I'm working on them with Jeffrey, but there's a much bigger team, and we're very that's how we operate. Like we collaborate as much as possible. And with Free Market, it was a great process because the collaboration, we quickly learned that the collaboration was basically enabling your colleagues to do their best possible work, and it wasn't about being involved in everything, and it was about trust. And it's been really fruitful, and that's why we're continuing. There's still 3 or 4 projects amongst the group in different ways, and people are involved in different ways and different roles.
But that's your model of practice, though, isn't it? That's the way in which you've chosen to operate as AP+E. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how we're operating. So the other project the other project I showed in the Netherlands, and there's a few of those types of projects in the Netherlands. We're collaborating with different teams all the time. And I also think that's the nature of the beast. Like in terms of architecture, like you're either at a very small scale or at a very large scale. We've no particular ambition to get to that very large scale, and so if we can stay within the small scale, we can work with way more talented people.
Jordan, I can imagine you've got no ambition to go to the large scale either. You're probably somebody who's quite happy just moving fleet of foot between project and project. Is that right?
Actually, I kind of want to grow into a huge studio that designs everything. from stadiums to headphones.
Excellent. So you're not limited in ambition then. That's one thing. So you're going to be the Thomas Heatherwick of Ireland, or is that a dirty word? I'm not too sure whether it is or not.
No, I think Thomas is amazing. That's the plan, definitely. The Thomas Heatherwick of the world, maybe.
So, Conor, if I just bring you back in now, because you've been silent a wee while. Obviously, in your day job, I suppose this goes back to this idea of this 2 years of planning. In your day job, you're obviously running a fairly significant design practice.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you reconcile this? Because it could be seen as a kind of pet project, and sometimes these things are seen as distractors from the reality of work.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember walking around Merrion Square Park with my business partner, and discussing the idea before we actually took our first steps. So it was very important to me that I had his blessing, because it would take time. But Stephen Kavanagh, my partner, he has enough vision and insight to know that it would only enrich the practice, really, and it's turned out to be one of the most rewarding things we've done together, and so that's not an issue, really. Over the years, both of us have been involved in so-called pet projects, and I think it's born out of the fact that when you're working on client-based work all the time, it doesn't necessarily feed your soul, So we have a little term in the studio, soul food. That's a soul food project, or that's a soul food project. So Design West definitely fell under that remit, but it's there's got to be more to what we do than chasing the dollar,
Absolutely, and I think from my own experience of dipping my toe in teaching from time to time, it really does do that. And also opens up your brain to other ways of thinking about things. I mean, you must see that, Laurence, from your own teaching at Queen's.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I've been lucky to we returned to Ireland just over 4 years ago, and I've been lucky to teach in 3 universities in Ireland in that time.
Wow,
so really expanding my network. And yeah, absolutely, like teaching. Yeah. It's definitely it's really important, not only in what you're hearing back from the students and their perspectives, but also speaking to your colleagues about it. It's hugely rich, and it's why also that this particular semester has been it's been very different. It's been very, very difficult in terms of teaching, but it's important.
Yeah, it's been hard, hasn't it? It's been particularly hard on them as well, because you are providing a particular role. Conor, in the context of the of Design West, what are you taking away from that in terms of, because obviously you're bringing people in to do the teaching? Are you running a kind of an umbrella position where you're just keeping things in check, or are you feeling that you can dive in?
Somebody referred to me last time as being the good shepherd. I'm just making sure everybody's looked after. But I mean, I know I'd be involved in teaching as well. But just to go back a little bit in terms of completing the circle. Actually, we're lucky in that we've ended up with some people that we met at Design West. Some of the students that we met at Design West have ended up working in my practice, which is
oh wow.
Not intentional. I mean, it just was a happy accident, and one thing led to another. But that's been a very nice completing of the circle, I guess. But in terms of summer schools and kind of starting out, I always referenced to people Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but what I found fascinating about that design festival in a small town in the Netherlands was that it was really based and built up around the grad show at the art school there in the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And I've enjoyed, in a way, of what I like about the Letter Frac GMIT connection is that their end of year show happens just as we're coming in to do the summer school. So it's a similar kind of relationship. And And I think, having that relationship with the academic institution kind of really grounds what we're doing, and one thing supports the other and one thing influences the other. So I think that's a kind of rich relationship there,
And having that backbone as well, I suppose, to support the process, because it's such it isn't, it's a little bit, well, it is like a festival, isn't it? In the sense you're arriving, you're there for an intense period, and then you disappear again.
Yeah, and actually, mentioning the idea of a festival, that we've had a kind of parallel ambition to grow a festival alongside the summer school, and we're actually looking at the idea of maybe the middle weekend becoming a little creative festival, which would include all the creative disciplines, but it might also include local food producers or involving the local community in workshops or whatever. So kind of giving something back to the village, I guess,
To get Thomas Heatherwick to sing on the Sunday night.
But Conor, that's something we maybe haven't touched on with Design West. Is what is the community role? Because there must be accommodation for these people. There must be people. You're needing to feed them all. How does the infrastructure of that work, and how do the community benefit from this school?
Well, it's amazing the impact. I suppose the Design West circus, when you add everybody up, is about 40 people, maybe getting towards 50 people. They go to the pub every night. They eat in the village every evening. We hire 10 apartments in the village. We hire a couple of houses. So I think our presence is felt. We've always been very conscious from the beginning, though, that we don't want to be the kind of the circus coming into town, doing our thing and just leaving. So whatever we can contribute to the community is important. And in terms of perhaps bringing in architecture to the fold going forward, the idea that we might actually leave something behind that's useful in terms of a structure, that'd be very exciting, I think,
Mm-hmm. Jordan, obviously you're on an island of 250 people with your structure. Are you leaving it behind? Is that it? Is there a legacy there, or how do the community benefit from your intrusion?
Sure. So the current plan is that the local community will actually run and manage the structure, and in the interim of artists being there, they'll be able to use it themselves as well. And I think the plan is, though, that it's going to actually go hopefully to London Design Week next year, and we're applying for funding to bring it to Tokyo as well, and then it will go back to the island and reside there permanently. We're in talks about kind of getting a long-term lease on a plot of land on the island and putting several of these on it as well. So it will be kind of for lack of a better word, a boutique camping place that the island will be able to run and look after as a business as well.
Okay, so there is a legacy, but actually it's a legacy that somebody else benefits from rather than just yourselves.
Absolutely,
in terms of the making process. Laurence, with Free Market, what was interesting about it is you obviously said that it led to other things in the town. Where would you place the legacy within the exercise that you've done through repatriation?
Well, I guess it's not finished, so it's difficult to fully understand. For example, the project there in Castleblaney that I was talking about, so that project's ongoing. Ultimately, it may not be us, but someone will be fulfilling a brief to bring back this building back into the space, back to life. Have the lights back on, which is massively significant for the town. And then we've been able to play a part in that. It's also opening up the discussion, because now we're involved in other towns that have seen this work. And so there's more avenues for us to go down, I guess. There was that tricky moment, though, that when you're because you invest a lot of time and you invest so much effort into these projects, and there's that moment sort of when what's it all for? But I guess that's kind of unclear, because one project morphs, it turns into something else, it leads to it leads to something else. You're always learning on these projects, and so other things have come out of it. I also think that there's and this isn't because of us, this is something that's happened across Ireland in the last couple of years, that people are much more aware of public realm and access to things and cycling infrastructure and all this. So there's a much wider conversation that's happening anyway. And we're just one of the many projects that are part of that.
Yeah.
So I guess, I can't really answer the question in terms of tangential legacy, but it's still having an impact. The fact that we're still working with colleagues that we met through this project.
Yeah, and that's maybe the ball is rolling, and that's the great thing. It didn't stop in Venice and sink into the canal. It carried on. So that's the important aspect of that.
Not at all. And like my colleague Orla has, like with Dr. Philip Crowe, has set up the Centre for Irish Towns in UCD, which is a more academic aspect of this, which is obviously looking at policy and the impacts. And then the project that I was talking about and other ones that we're doing are kind of more on the ground. So there's different aspects to what we're doing in terms of top down and bottom up at the same time, that all of us from the team are kind of aware of and sharing that information and moving all that forward.
Yeah. I'm going to move the conversation on just briefly, because obviously we're going to run out of time as ever. Conor, just on the Design West, obviously you're charging fees for these students to come in. How do you square that with the overall package that you're offering, and how the community sort of benefit from that?
Well, there's quite a number of things that have to be covered in terms of cost. Obviously, if you're inviting international designers to the west of Ireland, you got to get them there. You got to pay for flights. You got to pay for accommodation, and there's usually a night in Dublin at both ends of each week. And I'd be very conscious of the fact that if you're going to do something like Design West, that every aspect of the experience is very good. I remember having conversations before we did the first year about what brand of coffee people were going to drink, you know what I mean, on campus, making sure that the quality of the food is good, because at the end of the day, these people come, they experience Design West, and then they leave. And what you want them to do is to leave as ambassadors for the following year and the year after that. So you want people to leave with good experiences. So really the fees go towards flights, accommodation. There's also the course is actually a level 9 master's level course. So there is an actual cost for the credits that people can gain on the course. And then we have excursions, and we have, there'll be material costs for the 2 weeks in the workshops. So it's really about making all of that work and to try and make the experience as seamless as possible, It was funny, actually. I remember we were arriving on Inishbofin in the first year, and somebody said to me as we were walking around that the whole thing seemed so seamless. I didn't say anything. They had no idea of the amount of planning that had gone in from so many people over the previous 2 years. So in order for something to be seamless, I think A, you got to be funded, and B, you have to do an awful lot of work.
And someone needs to pay for that work.
And somebody needs to pay for it. And I think I had one basic kind of financial ambition about the whole thing, was that we would not lose any money. Whatever about making money, that it would cover its own costs. So that's worked out, which is great,
It's interesting. It's almost like a soft diplomacy, isn't it? You're sending people away with a picture of Ireland, both from a creative perspective, but also cultural. And you could almost measure that as a legacy of the success of the.
I think it's important to be a good host, and I think it's important, like, over the 2 years we've built together with the people in GMI, Letter Frack, and then my own team. We've built a very good team, but I think everybody understands the importance of being a good host. So the experience is not just about learning stuff in the workshop. It's almost about all the other stuff, really. It's about all the afternoons, the barbecues on the beaches, the conversations that you have in unexpected places. I mean, you might be climbing Diamond Hill, or you might be, in the pub at night. And that kind of sounds slightly random, but you actually have to design that. You have to make sure that that's going to happen quietly in the background, you know?
Yeah, it's a little bit like decisions that will be made in the corridors. It's, you know, you can have the meeting, but actually it's the stuff outside that counts. Jordan, how does it work with the community on the island if you're building something? Are they good hosts? Do they welcome this? Or is this, how is this sort of relationship?
They're brilliant. So my client Mary has been going out to the island for years, and she's from Galway, and she has an amazing relationship with the island. She knows everybody. They trust her. She trusts them. The guys come down with their tractors and will unload our shipping containers with all our components in it and drop them onto the site. They're really engaged and excited about the projects actually, and they're excited to work with Mary, and anyone that she brings along is immediately trusted, which is nice because in a small community like that, tourists pass through every day, but to actually gain trust to be allowed to build something in their land is an amazing credit. And I mean, some of the local young men that are still in secondary school, Mary has like paired up with an Irish fashion designer called Robin Lynch, and they've walked in Fashion Week in London for her, because she does quite themed clothes that are kind of a clash between East Coast or West Coast Ireland and modern streetwear. So there's this amazing relationship with the islanders and the creatives that work there, and it feels like it's ever growing as well, which is brilliant.
But more importantly, it's been invested in, which is again that issue. Even from the first conversation we had with Tom Keeley, who'd moved to Cork to carry his studies, just talking about being embedded, understanding the value of being embedded and giving it time to sort of make that relationship work. How did that work then, Laurence, with your kind of satellite delivery, where you're almost this caravan turning into town with the free market? Was there ever any animosity to the way in which you setting up your stall was perceived by the locals?
No, not so much. But I don't think we could ever claim that we were embedded in the community or anything like that. Like, we're not going to. I saw some of the earlier talks talking about, you know, how long participation and engagement takes. We wouldn't claim that for a second. We're aware that there's a lot that needs to get invested in that to build up that trust. No, but because we were quite open, we were quite upfront, and I do think this lowering the threshold, being on the street and being open, and kind of we gave badges and oranges, and we did vox pops, and there was newspapers, and we were generally smiley. So no, we were fortunate enough that we didn't confront any animosity in that sense, because we weren't being preachy or patronizing either. You know, we were looking for the good that was there and talking about the good that was there, but unfortunately it's been usurped because of X, Y, or Z, you know. So it wasn't, that was never the aim. It was always this idea of gathering information and listening and taking it back, and then researching, rather than no, you've got it all wrong here.
You didn't default to the traditional role of the architect then?
No, absolutely, and I think that's really important. And because I think there's a perception of what architecture is, and there's a perception of what architects do, and I think it's heightened by certain TV shows and a narrative arc that occurs in these TV shows. So I think your summer school, I'd be really hopeful for, because of the culture of architecture on the edge, but I'd be really hopeful that it kind of tries to break that down a little in terms of, you know, what the role of the architect, what architecture can do for everyone, you know, because it's being about as inclusive and the democratic nature of that.
Well, if we've learned anything, I think, from these 5 conversations, it's very much that you've said it very succinctly. Conor, if you were giving words of advice from your own experience, what would you be telling us to look out for in the preparation over the next 6 months?
I think team building is very important. You know, kind of building almost a fellowship of people, trusted advisors, trusted colleagues that are going to go the distance in terms of developing the thing. And then I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's if you can connect with an academic institution, a college that has facilities and that has an infrastructure, I think that's a huge benefit, a huge bonus. And then I think thirdly, really, it's about patience. And, you know, if you don't get there on the first try, just keep going because you'll get there on the second try. And I suppose leave room for things to fail. Everything isn't going to be perfect. So as you keep rolling, you tend to kind of improve the model.
I think leave room to fail. That's a great statement. I like it. I think failure again has come up so many times as well as being a positive rather than negative experience. Jordan, could you add to that? I'm not saying you're a failure, of course.
I would say I think it's really important to set up a platform in a way where people don't go, or the students don't go with a really set agenda of what they want to do or what they want to achieve. But I'd like to see them enabled to arrive at this remote location and learn about a process where they can engage with what's around them and imbue that into what they're creating, so that they can actually kind of do something that's true to where they are.
Lovely. And Laurence, are you going to contribute one final sage remark for us?
Well, it's basically it's round two of that same point about the perception of architects. I think there's something there in terms of how this is framed, where it's more inclusive and past that normal remit of who can potentially fund this, which will actually help with the funding, I think, in terms of bringing other financial partners on board when it moves past the typical people that fund architecture ventures, shall we say. If there's a way of framing it that it moves past that, I think could be really useful.
Sure, democratizing the whole process so it becomes more relevant as well for many others. Laurence, Jordan, Conor, thank you so much for joining me tonight and for concluding the last conversation for Architecture at the Edge. Hopefully I'll see you all in Galway next summer in 2021.
Hopefully.